Today. Says, hey, you look just like the guy on the video.
Yeah, that's right.
That's gewaltig. Okay. So yesterday we first learned about Rab Nachman's halacha. Rabbi Eliezer argued on the Tanakama. The Tanakama said women that cannot have children, whether they're an islandess, an akara, any type of a zakena, they cannot have children. That's not a condoned marriage for somebody who's supposed to be Mekayim Peruvu. Therefore, these women would not drink Sotah because they're in what we call a non-condoned marriage. Rabbi Eliezer argument says, why is that a non-condoned marriage? Since they could be Mekayim Peruvu with a different wife, let them stay married to this wife. So it's a condoned marriage. Rabbi Nachman came along and said, that's good for an akara. That's good for zakena. But an islandess who was never air conditioned, as we refer to it, an islandess who could never have had a child, she has a separate reason why she doesn't drink Sotah, because this is a niksav in Israel Zara. And the Gemara challenged Rabbi Nachman, and the Gemara ended up saying that in fact there's a machloikes tanoim pshat in Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, who holds as a kena, and when the Korah is a condoned marriage, what does he hold about islandess? One Tana says that he holds an islandess is not included in Sotah because of Niksav in Israel Zara. That Tana is consistent with Rabbi Nachman. The other Tana holds that even an islandess would be able to drink from the Sotah. That was the first thing that we discussed yesterday. Then we discussed the other limud from Niksav in Israel Zara, whether or not an akara would become healed through the Maimarim if she was in fact her, which is what Rabbi Kiva said, Rabbi Shmuel said, an akara wouldn't get healed, but they would definitely be an improvement in their child. Imagine someone has a whole bunch of children, and the first batch of children are like short, ugly kids, and then later on they're wonderful kids. And someone asks them, like someone of the grandchildren asks them, what happened in the family that suddenly the kids started being so nice? Oh, my mother was a Sotah. I'm not sure how it would be a difficult thing to explain. Okay, so Dr. Right. 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 So it didn't work. I hear. Okay. Okay, Dr. Gemara weiter. Then the Gemara went back to the Mishnah, analyzing each of the cases. Eishes mamzer, the chiddush is that the mitzvah of Puruvu, we discussed that there's a shaila, there's a mitzvah of Puruvu by a mamzer. Right, the Minchas Chinuch asks, it's a mitzvah of Abavera. Then we had Eishes ger, Ve'ev Meshuchar, V'aylis, because they're gerim. Maybe gerim wouldn't be included in Sotah. Then we discussed Eishes kohen. Then we discussed Eishes shris, and we had the Rashi here that says a shris could have via, just not children. Rashi in the Mishnah said otherwise. Then we discussed that you could be mekana through other arayos. So we discussed how Chana, even though she threatened to be soiser, avada, she wasn't going to do it to Isser. She wasn't going to be over the Yichud because she could have been soiser with her father, who she's allowed to be miyachad with. Okay, so it's a whole different challenge. Okay, so then we have chutz minakoton, then we have chutz misha ish, which the Gemara ended up settling on misha ish. The Gemara said is referring to a behema, and the Gemara ended up proving that znus with a behema is a gever l'chavera, but it's not referred to as znus. It's just it's a big isser, and therefore there's no kinui and stira with a behema. And we proved from the fact that there's no such thing as an esnan kelav. There's an esnan zaina, but not an esnan kelav, because that wouldn't be considered znus. Then we learned about the halacha of the fact that, thank you so much, the fact that the kinui and stira are totally in the peidah of the Baal, and that's why the Gemara said the maskana You could even be mekana a woman derech evarim because there's a hakpada. The hakpada from the Baal. Actually, I'm saying wrong. The Gemara said that you cannot make a. The Gemara is saying that the Mishnah is saying you cannot make a kinui based on their chevorim. The havamina that you would be able to is because it's totally in the kaped of the Baal kamash malon that you cannot make kinui for such a thing. Okay, and that's what we learned out of Shich Vazera. Lemute prat ledavar acher is being mekana woman der chevorim. Okay, gewaltig. Now, what Dovi brought up is normally the way we understand kinui is it's altisteru employni, right? Altisteru employni. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be mekana der chevorim? It means, I guess he said, instead of saying don't be secluded with somebody, he said don't do this with somebody. I guess. Does someone do that? Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. Amar Shmuel. I thought it was Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, "This is very good. If you're looking for a shidduch, we're going to get advice on what type of shidduch it's kedai to look for. What type of shidduch is kedai to look for? Is that what we're saying, Chaim? Yeah, that's right. So Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, if you're looking for a good shidduch, let me give you good advice. What type of shidduch you should look for? Yisa Adam Daima. If you're looking for a shidduch, let me give you good advice. Try to marry a daima. Avada, that's not what it means. It means if you're stuck and if you're not the best bacher in Lakewood, and you don't have your free choice of any girl that you want, and you're given a choice of less than desirable shidduchim, either a doima or a bas doima. What is a doima? A doima is people who talk about her that she's an ayefes. Tosha says shemalizin aleh b'nei adam she mizana. She doesn't have the greatest of reputations. Rashi says something even more radical. Everyone talks about it. It's known that this girl is of ill reputation, and you should, if you have a choice between her, marry her al yisa bas doima rather than her child. Why is that? At least we know her yuchsin is good because her mother was not promiscuous. But the zoo, you marry the daughter of a daima, bami tipa psula, you don't even know if she's a mamzer. Rashi is shavim kechavim, a mamzer. You don't know her yichus. So this is probably the chassidish mahalach. What she's going to make a fair lechavim? Get the yichus, get the zaynis. This is showing it. Right. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. The joke they say is when you're looking for a shidduch, they don't care so much about the actual person themselves. Mashenkin, the Litvish, they want the Choshev Bacha, they don't care where he comes from. When it comes from the Esrig, it's exactly the opposite. The Chassidim want a Shayna Gidol, a nice Esrig, and the Litvish want a Chronish Esrig, no Yichus. Don't forget. So Dr. Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yis Adam Bas Doima, you're better off marrying the daughter of a woman who is of ill repute, the Al Yisa Doima. Why? Shazu Oimedes Becheskes Kashrus. The Bas, Rashi says, is Oimedes Becheskes Kashrus Umuteres Levaila. She's mutter. I Lutipa Psula like Hashinan. You know why? The Roiv Bilois Achar Habal Umibaila Luzabra. Sure, her mother doesn't have such a good reputation, but you can make the assumption that this girl is the child of the man that this Doima was married to. And this girl is not Oimedes Becheskes Kashrus because she might be also to her husband. The husband might not be aware. So you're better off not marrying a doima because for all you know, your wife is going to be usher to you because of the things that she does. So who's it better to marry? Is it better to marry to a doima or is it better to marry a bas doima? And of course, once again, none of these are the chatchila. Meitzvah. I'm sorry? Well, they're telling us if you're faced with such a Tyler, what should you do? Okay, Zok the Gemara back here. Meitzvah. Noise Adam doima. A person should marry a doima. That almost sounds like that's what you should look for. L'chatchila. So you have a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. On Rav, it's not a kasha. The Tizbara. Anyway, this brisa is not accurate. Noisei lechatchila. Is the brisa actually saying that when you look for a shidduch, that's the type of woman you should look for lechatchila? Of course not. It means im nosatoni. If you have to marry such a woman, so better take the doima over the bas doima. But once you're amending the brisa and taking away the lashon noisei, well then tani nami bas doima. Once you're saying the brisa is inaccurate and needs to be amended, so I can amend it any way I want. The hilchasa, what is halacha l'maisa? Yis adam bas doima val yisa doima, because once what we could be soimech on roy bilas achar abal, and you don't have to be worried that your wife will be usher to you because she did an affair and you didn't know about it. Tani Rav Tachlifa bar my Rabba Kamei Rabavo, Isha mizana boneh ksherin. Even if a woman is mizana, you can still assume her children are kosher. You know why? Because roiv be'ilois achar habal. Roiv be'ilois go after the baal, so we can assume that these children are the children of her husband, not the children of the milkman. So this is a very interesting part. A couple of things to say. First of all, the Welt sagt, yes, roiv be'ilois achar habal. But achem vei, if you have to rely on that roiv. That's number one. Number two is they asked Reb Chaim when he was a little boy. It's the way the Gemara learns the rule of roiv be'ilos achar abal is it says maka ava ve'imoi moishumos. How do you know for sure that when you hit this man, he's your father? Maybe he's not your father. Elamai roiv be'ilos achar abal. So when Reb Chaim was a little boy, they asked him why did the Gemara bring a right from maka ava ve'imoi? There's a lot of mekalel all of ve'imoi. How could you give somebody a misa if he curses his father? How do you know that's his father? That's what they asked Reb Chaim when he was a little boy. Reb Chaim answered without skipping a beat. You don't need to know who your father is to curse him. Someone could tell you, whoever my father is, he should be cursed. That's machal of, and he doesn't know what it is. But by makav of ima, you have to hit the right person. So that's why you have a right to the right. Question. Dr. Gemara Boy Rav Amram, and this is already a very big shaila. What if she wasn't a woman with a bad reputation? She was completely promiscuous. Now, what will be the halacha? And please don't ask me for the exact parameters. What makes you into a prutza b'yoser? If we hold that a woman only becomes misaberes samach levesta, which he doesn't necessarily know exactly when that is, you can't ask a shaila because the lo yodaba v'lo minterla. There, it's for sure a problem because he doesn't know when she could possibly conceive, and therefore he doesn't know when to watch her, so she's totally out of control. However, kiti boilach our shaila, and therefore we don't know if we say right bilas achar abal. However, kiti boilach our shaila is aliba demand amar ein isha misaberes ela samuch l'tfilasa. Her tefillah, he will know when she tevils. So even the yadaba niture manterla, since he knows this is leil tefillah, so at least he'll keep an eye on his wife during the time where she's likely to conceive. So it still will protect her with roiv bilas achar bal. Ideal even the prince of yoser loy, she'll still find some way. Rashi the ikal mechish the roiv bilas mishalacherim. Then we can't rely on it, and therefore loy maybe she is not. We cannot assume that her children are hers. Yeah, that's interesting. She'll flip out for a second. Right, the other is more that she's a proof to be yaitzer, but you see, she's still not going to go to the mikveh. You see how important Taras HaMishpach is. My son might be a mamzer, but he's not going to be a bas mitzvah. So this is a fascinating sugya. The sugya of roiv bilas achar bal. I'm sorry? Yeah. Which story? She's not Namenes. It's not true. It's not pshat. The Gemara says a woman is not. The Gemara says a woman who says I was mezana is not Namenes. Period. And the Gemara says why she's not Namenes? If Klap Shema Galia, yeah, but halacha l'maisa she's not treated like a mamzer because we don't believe her. Because maybe she's saying it because she wants her husband to divorce her. So we don't believe her. The Gemara says at the beginning we used to believe them. Now ladies have no namanas because they might have said that because they want out of their marriage. So they're not believed. And Moshe Paskin, the Gemara says, the Mishnah Paskins, she is not believed, period, as I Paskin them. There's many mamzerim out there we don't know. I mean, every day we deal in business with Observum. How do you if we know for sure she was Mizana? It's not so likely that we'll know. Yeah. Or how about if a woman marries her brother? How about if a woman is married to her brother? If the boy says, "What? That my wife? He needs Adam." Oh, that could be a problem. Yeah, that could be a problem. That could be a problem. Okay, so that is this sugya. But there's a phenomenal. I mean, there's a lot of shilas about this, but the one extreme shaila is a shaila that was brought out in the Noida Behuda. And the story is as follows. We have to preface it with a Maretz Chayis right here. The long Maretz Chayis in Sotah has a fascinating story. In the beginning of the Novi Yeshaya, Rebbeinu Shalom instructed Yeshaya to go find himself the most prutzadik Zoyna out there and marry her. So Yeshaya went and married a Zoyna. She was the known Zoyna. Like she was known to be a Bavusta Zoyna, a prutza b'yoser for sure. And he had children with her. And after he had children with her, Rebbeinu Shalom told the Navi, divorce her, throw her out with her children. So the Navi said, how can I throw out these are my children? How do you expect me to throw out these children? Rebbeinu Shalom said, you are married to a woman where you don't even know if these are your children or not, and you can't throw them away. So my children who rebelled against me, you think I'm going to destroy them? How could I destroy my dear children? That was the Nabu. So I think the Marshal asked, why didn't you say right? What do you mean? I don't know. What do you mean Hashem told Yeshai, whose are your children? They're his children. So what was the time that the Rebbe told him, why are you worried about it? You don't even know if they're your children. I know they're my children. So Mashal answers, since Yeshai at the time was very, very old, if the husband is very, very old, you no longer say, Roiv Bilas Achar Baal. Correct the Maretz Chayis, why do you have to make up a new svarah that he was very old? She was a prince of Yosy. If she's a prince of Yosy, the Gemara has a shaila right over here, whether or not you say Roiv Bilas Achar Baal. That's interesting shaila. So, it's a long Maretz Chayis. I did not go through the Maretz Chayis. I'm not going to tell you I didn't go through the whole Maretz Chayis. I didn't even look at the Maretz Chayis. I heard this over from Rabbi Bornstein. He says a Gavalta Yeshir, so I was listening to him yesterday. So he spoke out of Noida Behuda as well. A phenomenal, fascinating Noida Behuda. There was a woman who was married to a man for 7 years. And for 7 years, they did not have any children. At the end of his life, he got so terribly, terribly sick, and he died. 9 months after he died, she had a child. And the shaila is it her child from her husband? And then she's not mechuyev yibum because there was a brother there and she had no children. So the shaila and Nebuch, the Nifter's brother, was only 3 years old, which means she would have been in Aguna for 10 years till this child would have been old enough to give her chalitza. But people were saying there is no way in the world that this is his child, because they didn't have children for 7 years. And you're claiming the conception would have happened like right before he died, where it was known that he had 24-hour care. And he was so sick he couldn't even move. And someone saw her going to the mikveh 2 weeks after her husband died. If she was pregnant, why she going to the mikveh? And she was hanging out with somebody. So therefore, let's say Pashtus, she was mizana after her husband died, while she was a Shemesh Yovim. We pass in like Marova that Shemesh Yovim Shizint is Muteres Liyavama, and she should be Mechuvin Yibam, and she now has to wait 13 years. This was the Shaila that came to the Noida Behuda. The real story. This happened. Not only did it happen, do you know when his Yortzeit is? His Yortzeit was Erev Shchad Yesivan, which is now mamish in our times, and the baby was born in Adar, which is 9 months later. So that's the child that came to the Noida Behuda. No. But what he paskin is, he paskin with two tzad and lahatir. He paskin with two tzad and lahatir. He said, first of all, just because they didn't have a baby for 7 years, that doesn't mean you can't have a baby. Adarabah. He said, I spoke to doctors. The Noida Behuda spoke to doctors in his time, And they said if somebody becomes sick, sometimes that changes what's going on inside their body. And it's possible, medically possible, that someone who could never have a child with that change due to their illness would make them childbearing. So couldn't go, it's possible that she's expecting. Now you're asking me, she went to the mikveh 2 weeks later, she was caught going to the mikveh. The doctor said that there are some women during pregnancy who stain a lot. I mean, that's we know those are the Kiddush. So there's no problem with her going to the mikveh. No problem with her going to the mikveh. So Oibezoyi says we have a concept of Roy Bilas Achabal. He was a Zokin, right? That was another one of the titles that you see from the Navi, from the Mashal, that since a Zokin, you don't say Roy Bilas Achabal, maybe you don't say, but he did not. Avada, there's no reason to assume this is not his child, and Avada, she is Muter B'Ibn. And even if you want to say that she was Mizana, Mehechatesa, she was Mizana after her husband died. Maybe she was Mizana before her husband died. If she was Mizana before her husband died, then she's Asura Labaila, so she's not Mechuyev in Yibum anyway. So even if you want to make her out to be a bad woman, there's still a tzad to say that she's not Neufel Yibum, and he was Mater her Lishon. That's the
what are the odds that if he's a Zaken, that he would have a 3-year-old brother?
It's not such a schwerkeit, because my wife has a sister. My wife is in her 50s, and she has a sister that if her sister would be alive today, her sister would be about 100 years old. Obviously not from the same mother.
No, from the father.
I lost 2 sisters along the war. So from 1945 to now is almost 80 years. And they were 10, 11 years old. So I would have now sisters-in-laws that are in their late 90s. So it's very possible.
When you say brother, it could be a half brother from either the mother or the father.
It depends on the father. Yeah, Yibum means it's a brother through the father, even though they don't share a mother. Right. So you see that. You see sometimes through an illness, you can have children. That's a fascinating mindset in the night of Yudah. Okay. So let's see. 629. I have another gewaltige shtickle that Rabbi Borchin said over. He's always gewaltig. But it's already 629. So let me finish the daf and I'll go back and remind me about Avua de Shmuel. Why was he called Avua de Shmuel? Didn't he have his own name? He actually had his own name. So why was he always referred to as Avua de Shmuel? We had recently Avua de Shmuel said that you have to put earth into the Mayim Hamorim before you put the ink into it, because it has to be Morim, right? Avua de Shmuel, what's wrong with his own name? But we're going to discuss that in a minute. Ve'elu shebezin, if we get there. Ve'elu shebezin, the list, these are the list of people who have Bezin warned them. Tanur Rabban, Ish. Matam Adam Ish, why to say twice, L'Rabbis, Ish is Cheresh, Veish is Shoita, Veish is Shimum, Veish Holach Baila, L'Bedin Hayom, Veish Yachavush, Veish Asurin, Shebezin Maknan Lahem, L'Poislan Niksubasan. Right? We learned this already. Yesterday, Yochel Aflashkoy said, you might think that we would let them drink, we may Sotah in the event that their husband comes back and is able to, and then there's a stira. Tamad Leimer behavi ha ish es ishtoi. Dafka the husband. Yosy Omer Aflashkoysa, but sheyetze bailam bebeis asurim, then yashkena. Clearly, someone who became a cheresh or shoyt is not going to get healed. It's not assumed he's going to get healed, but someone in jail eventually will come home. What is the machlokes as to whether or not the husband could be mashka her based on the kinui of the bezdin? Does the kinui have to be done dafka through the baal, or can the kinui be done through bezdin? Rabbanan Savi Ba'inin the kinui vehevi, meaning it's the husband who has to do the kinui, and therefore the kinui of bezdin won't work. Rabbi Yosy saw by loiba inan the kinui vehevi. Tan Rabbanan Asher sister Isha takas Isha. So we're comparing the Isha to her husband, to Isha. We had this a couple of blot ago, but the Gemara didn't give us the details of what this hekesh was for. And where did we have this hekesh before? When we were discussing whether or not a Shemeres Yovein is in the parsha of Sotah, and one of the Manda'arim will held that she is in the parsha of Sotah, that she's not in the parsha of Sotah, is Mamayir from Asher sister Isha Tachas Isha, and the Manda'arim who held that she did drink used it Lahakash Ishla Isha Ve'isha Le'ish. Amr Rabbi Yosef Kashem Shem Hu Suma. If the husband is blind, the parsha of Sotah does not apply to him. Clearly, the husband has to be able to see. Therefore, we say she needs to have the same. A blind woman would not be covered by the halacha of Sotah. A woman who is somewhat crippled or missing a limb. How do we know that? Because it says the Hamid Hakoyin Isha, and you cannot have a proper Hamad of Hamid V'Chigeres. So you know she can't have an issue with her leg. And it says the Micha means she has to have hands. Kachu im hayachiger agidam loy hayamashka. My Bravashi Amar Kashem Shi'ilemes Lahosha Soisa, just like a woman who was an Elam who couldn't speak, didn't drink. Dichsiv Amar Isha Amen Amen. Kachu im haya Elam loy hayamashka. So too, if he's an Elam, he's not masker with the Sotah. Now the question here is, let me ask you a question. If you want to make, let's say you have to make a shvuah in Bezdin, right? Could you make the shvuah in writing? Can you write the shvuah, or do you have to articulate the shvuah out of your mouth? So they bring a raya from this Gemara that you have to articulate that you don't have to articulate the shvuah out of your mouth. Why? Because why did the Gemara need to bring a raya from the pasuk that says V'amra Isha Amen Amen? The woman has to swear. If the woman has to swear and she cannot speak, so then she can't make the shvuah, so the whole parsha doesn't apply. Elamai, it must be that for her to do the shvuah itself, she could have written Amen Amen, and it would have been enough. The problem is because the Torah says she has to verbalize, and only that's the reason why the Gemara excludes a woman who cannot speak from the parsha of Sotah. Vice the Chosh, you could make a shvuah, even though you're not articulating out of your lips, you can make a shvuah in writing. But believe neder, we should be zoicha, hadin alach arusa, we should be zoicha to finish the fourth parak. And now we chazir the fourth parak again, and now we're going to go to the fifth parak. This parak, you can see we have very small prokim, one mishnah, one long gemara, but it's all agadita, it's all diversion. We're going to have maybe 2 seconds of Sotah, and then we're going to have all interesting agadita. So I want to rush through this because I still want to tell you the gewaltige shtickle that Rabbi Warren said over about Avu the Shmuel. It has to be a gehedig, I guess. Just like the woman blows up when she drinks from the Sotah, same thing happens to the milkman. It says twice, one for her, one for him. The same way a woman becomes usher to her baal when she's mizana, this limud is from one of the psukim. It says many times nitma in the parsha. But since instead of using the word nitma, there's a vav that precedes it, it says vinitma. From there we learn that it's asher labal as well, asher laboil as well. Divei Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, kacha yedor shechai ben akatzim. Rabbi Yomer, it's not because of a vav, it's because shnei pa'am hamurim b'parsha nitma echad labal v'echad laboil. So is it because there's an extra word nitma, or is it because of a vav? Either way, we learn echad labal v'echad laboil. Let me ask you a question. What would the halacha be if a woman was nenas? If a woman was nenas, is she usher to the baal? If a woman was nenas, is she usher to the baal? Not for Yisrael. Is she usher to the boil? In other words, do we learn that it's totally zebazeh when it's usher to the baal, that it's usher to the boil, or maybe not? Now there is such a shaila about that. So talk more about it. On that day, what was that day? What was that day? Rashi says this was one of the most famous days in the history of the Jews. Anytime the Mishnah refers to boy b'yoyim, it's a yoyim shayishiva yesh Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Nesios. It's the day that Rabbi Gamliel was removed from the Nesios, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed in his position. In this Rabu Talmidim, the first thing Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah did was he says you don't need to be toichei kabarai, and then suddenly all of the hypocrites came to join the Besmedrash because he wasn't so makbid. Yeah, hypocrites came. Aval Pikein, he said, let them learn. They'll become ice hypocrites. He opened up the Besmedrash. They didn't have such strict bouncers around the Besmedrash, and they let many more people in. And made tons of money off of it. Kibbutz Lavi, because they had to make a whole bunch more benches. They had to add a whole bunch more benches and furniture to the Besmedrash because a whole bunch more people came to learn Torah. Everybody came. Anyone who's a hypocrite, we don't need such a person in the Bismedish without pure intentions. But Rabbi Lezer says, no, let's open it up to everybody. Maybe they'll become better. And you know what happened? That day, there were so many Talmidim who came to learn. In other words, what happened was, imagine if Lakewood made a rule, you're only allowed to come here if you want to learn. If you're here because you want to do good shidduch, you can't come. They might as well close their doors. And suddenly Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, no, even for shidduchim, come to Lakewood, and boom, the yeshiva exploded. And at that point, there was such a ribuy of Torah. Did I say that, or was I just thinking that? There was such a ribuy of Torah that every halacha was inspired. So that's why there's so many different halachas that came up that day, and they were mefarshim. Why is this nageya here in our Mishnah? It must be that this nitma that we just discussed that teaches you echad l'bal v'echad l'boyo was also taught on that day. So let's see what else happened. Wow. So Kibbutz Avi made a fortune. Dorish Rabbi Kiva. Uchli cheres asher yipoel mehem el toichai. If you have a kli cheres and the sheretz falls into the kli cheres, kol asher b'soichai yitma. Anything that's inside the keli, it doesn't say becomes tameh. It says yitma will be metama something else. Eino yomer tameh, ela yitma l'tama acher. What does this mean? Let's think about this. I have a kli cheres, that's tahor. I take a sheretz and I dangle it in. The sheretz is an avatuma. It's going to make the keli tameh, right? So the keli would become a rishon, right? Now it says kol asher b'soichai yitma. So it means if there's something else inside there. So let's say I have an egg rolling around in this keli. That egg will become tameh. How does it become tameh? From the kli cheres. So the kli cheres becomes a rishon. So the egg will become a sheni. But it says yitma. It says whatever's in that keli could now go be metama something else. Which means this egg that's a sheni could now go and be metama another thing that's a shlishi. Which means even by chulin, the pasuk doesn't say it's talking about truma or kachim. Which means even by chulin, a sheni could make a shlishi. Because the progression of tumah is the receiver always has one level lower of tumah than the level that it contracted it from. The sheretz is not, it's matama the keli. Yeah, but the sheretz is not directly matama the egg. If the keli, that's how it works. That's how it works. There is Wi-Fi, but it's not directly from the sheretz. It has to go through all the communications have to go through the Wi-Fi point. So it goes to the keli and back out of the keli. So but that's a good question. I always wondered that. Why can it go direct? But that's not how it works. Limed al kikar sheni to metames hashlishi even by chulin. We don't paskin like that. But that's the limud that Rabbi Kiva darshan. Rabbi Shua said, mi yegala offer me'necher Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Halavai Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would have tchias hamesim because he would so appreciate the drasha that Rabbi Kiva just made. Shayisa Omer Osid Dar Acher Litar Kikar Shlishi She'ela Mikra Min HaTorah. We know that there's a derabanan, miderabanan Asheni is metama ashlishi by truma, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was worried as the dairis deteriorate, they're going to throw away the takana, and they're no longer going to accept that a shlishi is tamei, show tamei. But look. Generations later, not only did it get Ogeshvach verkehrt, Rabbi Kiva Talmidecha, and although Rabbi Kiva wasn't a direct Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, he was a Talmud of a Talmud. Rabbi Kiva Talmidecha, maybe Loi Mikrim and Torah found a place to darshan even in the Torah to Tomei. The Nemer Kol Asher B'Tzoicha Yitma. So Rabbi Yochanan was Geshept Nachas v'Nezete Drosha. They bring a Gavaltic Raya from this Mishnah right over here that I think Dave Zolti would appreciate. We have a rule that Ein Bezdin, it could be Oiker, the Divrei Bezdin Chaverer, unless they're greater than them, B'chachma U'B'minyan. B'chachma U'B'minyan. However, that applies to Xeris. Here you have a Rebbe Kiva who was able to darshan a deraisin de halacha that was never darshaned up until that point. You see, you could do that. So you see that you can have Rebbe Kiva could darshan a deraisin de halacha that was only discovered when Rebbe Kiva made that drosha that did not exist before Rebbe Kiva.
But I don't understand something. This is a what was decided exactly that
The Midairaisa Shlishi could become
oh,
Tameh.
that you're not talking about you're not talking about the previous case as well, that the boil
No,
and
no, no. He's just
oh,
talking about
okay.
the Eichel becoming Tameh. Boy beyond again on that day, Darish Rabbi Kiva. We learn that all the Arya Leviim had an area around them that was designated. Umadoisem michutz la'ir, measure around the perimeter of the city, as pas kedma alpayim ba'ama. There should be a 2,000 amma perimeter around each city. Umikra achar amar, another pasuk says, mikir ir v'chutza elef amma. There's a 1,000 amma radius around the city. Stop it. Dr. Gemara, EF Shalomer Elef Amma, Shekfar Nemar Alpayim Amma. EF Shalomer Alpayim Amma, Shekfar Nemar Elef Amma. Is it 1,000 amas or is it 2,000 amas? Elamai, it's both, and each one has a separate function. Okay, Tzad, Elef Amma is Migrish. Migrish, Rashi tells us, is an area that's kept free so that when you come up to the city, it should look beautiful. They wanted the cities to look very, very nice, so that when you come to the city, it looks nice. Migrish is Rachva Pnuya Mizriya Umibatim Umilanois. It's like an open park area. It's like a beautiful park. Lanoi Ha'ir Liot La'aver, a nice open airy place. And when it says Alpine, so the Elef is there should be beautiful parkland around each of the cities of the Levium. And the 2,000 amas is the Alpine amas is Tchum Shabbos. This to teach us that Tchum Shabbos is 2,000 amas. Rabbi Eliezer ben Noshor Great Yomer Elef Amma Migrish. It's 1,000 amma that's Migrish. The Alpine amma is Sotah Shekramim. It's not talking about the Tchum. It's talking about Sotah Shekramim. And there's a machlokes showing him. Rashi here says that the first 1,000 amma is Migrish's park, and the second 1,000 amma radius is Sotah Shekramim. But I believe the Rambam says it's a total of 3,000 ammas. First, 1,000 amma of Migrish, then an additional 2,000 amma of Sotah Shekramim. Boy beyond Dosh Rabbi Kiva. Oh, the Blina strikes again, because we're going to say the Shira today. Oh, the Yosy of Israel is a Shira Zois Lashem. Normally, when it says V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar, it's Hashem told Moshe that he should repeat it and say it for Klal Yisrael. So what's the Yosher Lemar? Lemar Malamed Shal Yisrael Oinin Shira Acharav Shal Moshe Al Kol Davar V'Davar Kakarnis Ahal. So it was pasuk by pasuk. That's what the Lemar is, that we said it's pasuk by pasuk. Lakach Nemar Lemar. That's why it says Lemar. On this, they do it. Could be, yeah. It's Malcolm's. It says, "Oh, Yashir Malcolm of Bnei Yisrael is a Shir Hazois," right? Rabbi Nechemia Omer Kikarin Shema the Loy Kikarin Sahalo. What does it mean Kikarin Shema? Rashi says for both the Gemara Mefarish, the Gemara Mefarish. We're going to have to wait for the Gemara to see what that means. Boy b'yom Dorish Rabbi Shua ben Horkias Loy Avad Iyav Tzakadosh Baruch Hu El Mehavam. Iyav did Avodah Mehavam. Shnamar says in the pasuk, "Hen Yikaleni." Even if I'm killed, Loy Yachal, I'm going to yearn towards the Rebbeinu Shlomo. But Vadayin Davar Shakol. Loy with a vav or loy with an aleph. Loy ani mitzapa or any mitzapa. Maybe I'm not going to look towards Hashem. Maybe it's loy with that aleph. Rashi says. Talmud loymar. Another pasuk says ad egva until I die. Loy asir tu mosi mimeni. My completeness with the Rebbeinu Shloim will not leave me. Malamit shmei ahava also. I'm Rabbi Shua. Mi yigala offer meinecha. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is alive today, he would have enjoyed your drasha. So Yisad Darish call your mecha. Your whole life, Yudakshin Shaloi Avad Eve as a Mokim Elamiyira. Shinema Ish Tam V'Yasher, you're Realakim V'Sor Meira. V'Haloy, Yeshua Talmud, Talmidcha, Yeshua, you're Enikal. The Talmud of the Talmud, Lama Shemei Ahava Asa. What a beautiful Mishnah. We'll see the Gemara B'Esh Shem tomorrow. So I just want to share with you a Gavaltic Yishtikal that unfortunately, this is his own Torah, I believe, that he spoke out yesterday. It's his own shtickle. So we have over here a question: is it better to marry a doima or is it better to marry a bas doima? And Shmuel said you're better off marrying a doima. So he wanted to suggest punkt why Shmuel, who held you should marry a bas doima. So he says we know there's a yid by the name of Avu de Shmuel. He's quoted all over Shas. I used Chacham, but he was called Avu de Shmuel. Yet in Yerushalmi, he's also quoted many times. His name, his actual name, is only quoted once in Mesechus Brachos somewhere. He was called Abba Bar Abba HaKoyin, or Abba Bar Rav HaKoyin. He had a name, Abba Bar Rav. Why do we always refer to him here as Avu de Shmuel? Yet in Yushalmi, he's actually mentioned many times as well, but by name. So he saw he told us, he said a new saver, a new print came out of Seder Adoyers, and in the back there's notes. So he saw this somewhere. Very, very simple. Very, very simple. There's a famous story with Moshe Reichman, Rav Pam, Rav Avram Pam, the real Rav Pam from Torah V'das, once called Moshe Reichman's office to speak to Moshe Reichman. So the secretary asked, "May I please tell Mr. Reichman who's calling?" So he says, "Yes, please tell Mr. Reichman that Rav Pam's father is calling." Because Rav David Pam's father, right? Why? Because in Toronto, his chashivas is Rav David Pam's father. Or at least that was his perception, right? So in Babel, Shmuel was such a Shem Davar. So the biggest covered with how to address somebody would be Shmuel's Tata. That's the biggest chus for him. But in Eretz Yisrael, Shmuel wasn't the other big gedolim there. So in Eretz Yisrael, they called him by his name Abba Barav. But Kohen. But in Eretz Yisrael, he was called Avudah Shmuel. So that's the Poshup shot and why he's called Avudah Shmuel in the Mishalmi. But he wanted to suggest another fascinating shot. There's a Gemara somewhere. There's a Tosfos somewhere. That alludes to this story as follows: that Shmuel's father, Abba Bar Abba, I think his name is Abba Bar Abba, he was working far, far, far away from where he lived, and he once uttered a shem, and he flew home. I think they didn't have air travel in those days. They had Star Trek travel. What's it called when he beams him up? So he uttered Hashem and he came home for the night. And that night Shmuel was conceived, and then he went away. So you could imagine what everybody was saying, that this is the milkman's son, because he's not here. He popped it for a night. Nobody knew about it, right? And I guess that mode of transportation wasn't available to everybody. It was only available to the VIPs. So Mamela, there was a laz on Shmuel. So because of that, they would have to call him Avu de Shmuel, so it should be known the Tata from Shmuel. So based on that, maybe that's why Shmuel is the one, because Shmuel's whole name, why isn't Shmuel considered a mamzer? Because he was always called Avu de Shmuel, so it would identify who Shmuel's father was. So that's why Shmuel said Yisa Adam Doime, well Yisa Bas Doime, because he suffered from the Bas Doime syndrome. So he said, better marry a Doime, at least they'll know who your yichus is. That's what he wanted to figure out. Right? He smelled. And he feels from chashad. Herring. They'll take the milk and they'll run. They won't want to get even close to him. The heilige milkman. The heilige milkman. Gewaltig. Okay, have a wonderful day, Rabbi Say.